right, so have you guys ever heard the term of counterfeit? Have you really not, Lauren? Okay. Can somebody give me a quick definition of counterfeit? Money, fake. Like Brendan. Fraud of the original. Fraud. Okay, that's kind of true. You guys are kind of hitting it. You're hitting it. So it actually basically means something that's fake, but it's very close to the real thing. But so like what you guys were saying of money. So a lot of the times the first thing you'll think about is counterfeit money because people try to make money, which I'm telling you doesn't work. There was one time there was this guy that tried to make money and he was so bad that he literally spelled Washington wrong and they spent so much money trying to find them because they couldn't find him. But he didn't even do well with like making the right money. It was so bad. You know what my favorite thing is though? When people try to be counterfeit, but it ends up being like not at all like the real thing. Like I have a couple of examples here. So these are a couple of my funny ones. So can we get the picture up on the screen? So the first one is that lion thing. You could clearly tell it's not the Lion King, and also it's Chewbacca. Chufasa. I didn't even see that. That it makes it so much more amazing. Okay, let's see another one. So Adidas. Here you think it's great, you know? Adidas. It looks like the logo, and then it's nothing is possible. You know, instead of nothing is impossible, nothing is possible. So negative. Okay, let's do like one more here. And then the North Fake instead of the North Face. It's the North Fake. I would buy that. I think that's funny. I just think it's crazy how many things can turn into counterfeit stuff. Like, if anything worth anything has probably been made into a fake because people tried to make something cheaper than it is to make money off of it, you know? Like, there's the knockoff luxury brands. This is kind of a luxury brand. They have makeup dupes, so you'll find people that come out with a makeup line and something that's super cool that becomes popular, and then people try to copy it and make it cheaper. Or money, my favorite one. And I feel like sometimes too, even times faith, whether it's your own or other people, can feel sometimes counterfeit. Like, have you guys ever felt that way before about your faith? That maybe you don't have as much of an authentic faith as your friends in your small groups. Like maybe you might say or do some certain things because it's just what we do at youth group. You will answer questions with what you think is the right answer, not because it's anything of your own faith, but because it's what the right answer is what you think that you should answer. Or you do things just because everybody else is doing it, and that's just the thing to do. Like you sing along in worship, but you're really just not, you're just singing along to something. You're not really worshiping and doing that thing. And can I let you in on a little secret? You guys want to know a secret? Okay, I'm going to tell you the secret anyways. You guys are so not talkative tonight. Well, I was going to tell you the secret that in high school, I was actually very counterfeit Christian. It sounds very funny. So when I was in high school, if you didn't know, I went to youth group here. So some of you, I actually was in youth group when you guys were really little. When you guys were little, 6th grade, that's not that little. And so I was heavily involved. I was on the visioning team, the leadership team we have. I was at one point in the band. That was real interesting. I can't actually sing. I can't believe they let me sing. I went to literally everything I could possibly go to. Youth group, events, trips. I would beg my youth director to let me go on stuff because my parents couldn't afford to take me. And so I'd be like, please give me scholarships so I could go. And I would even be at the church during the week, just hanging out, doing whatever my youth director gave me to do because I just loved it here so much. And so from the outside, you think I had this big, authentic faith because I was heavily involved. I was going to things. I would volunteer to pray when no one would pray. I would answer all the questions in small groups. I would jump and dance and sing and worship and stuff like that. And I'd come early to set up. I'd stay late to tear down. I did everything that you would think an authentic, big Christian your age would do. But on the inside, I was doing those things because it was what you did when you were in youth group. I answered those questions because I thought it was the right answers. I jumped and danced around in worship because that was what you just did. That was the fun thing to do in that moment. But I didn't do any of those things because of the right reasons. In reality, I felt like I never really measured up. I thought that growing in my faith always felt like I had to be more. I had to know more. I had to learn more. I had to do more. I had to be more than who I already was. If God was really real, if I actually believed in God, then it wouldn't even be worth it because he would think I'd be such a fake. He would think I'd be such a counterfeit Christian because I didn't know more. I didn't know all this stuff. I didn't know enough about him. I didn't know enough about the Bible. I didn't open my Bible enough. I didn't pray enough. I didn't listen to Christian music enough because I felt like I was never enough. And so I always felt fake and counterfeit and not like I was really a real Christian. And now maybe you've never felt something extreme as that, but maybe there's been moments in youth group or when as you're walking through your own walk in your faith to where you're not sure if what you're doing or what you believe is really real or really the right thing. Or if you've ever felt counterfeit, maybe you feel like you have to hide it and you have to perform those things because if other people find out about you, then they would think that you're not that cool at all, because that's what I felt. I thought if I would actually admit that I didn't have as big of a faith as I led on to be, then I wouldn't be friends with my friends anymore, that my youth director wouldn't let me do things or be part of the leadership team and stuff, and it was scary. And guys, if you've ever felt like that in any type of capacity, if you've ever felt like you have to know more, learn more, do more, be more, if you've ever felt like you're just kind of going through the motions, I want to let you know that you're not alone in that. And that is a very normal thing. And I think it's a thing that we don't talk about a lot, that sometimes being Christian can feel like this big standard to live up to. And so that's why I want to talk about it tonight. Because if you're in a place where you may feel like you're a counterfeit, or you just want to know how to connect more with God, how to learn how to have a better relationship with Jesus, there's good news. Because guys, God wants to grow in your relationship with him. And he wants you to have that authentic faith more than even you do. He craves it so much. And then the best person that we can learn from is the one that God literally sent down to earth to live among us, which is Jesus Christ. Thank you. Brendan, thank you for answering me and my other mutterings here. We'll get better at answering. We'll take a whole class together, okay, on responding, okay? We'll do that later. Anyways, so that's where we're going to talk, what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about a time when Jesus was living and walking and breathing on earth like we are today. And the really cool part is that his closest friends and followers, everything that Jesus experienced and did and said has been written down and documented so that we can learn from it, so that we can know what we can do to have a more authentic faith with him. And so tonight we're going to be looking at a story recounted by one of Jesus' followers, Matthew. And so during this time, Jesus was just hanging out with his 12 disciples, his closest friends, kind of doing nothing. They were probably sitting eating or something. I don't know. I just expect that they eat all the time because it was probably long walks on the road, And when this huge group of people showed up, because they wanted to hear from Jesus. They wanted to know how that they could grow in their faith. They craved a genuine relationship from their Creator. And they were like, if anybody was going to know about it, it was Jesus. And so, naturally, like you would do, Jesus decides to hike up on the side of a mountain and start preaching to them, start teaching them. Because there's a large group. And so this is what we know today as the famous sermon called Sermon on the Mount, which is basically a fancy way of saying Jesus was talking on the side of a mountain. Nothing crazy. The crazy part about it is what we actually get, the people that he was talking to was really surprised by what he had to say. Not because it was anything crazy. He was super famous because he did it on a side of a mountain, even though I'm obsessed with mountains. I mean, you could obviously tell. It was super surprising and super famous because of what he said and what it was about. Because you see, the entire message that Jesus taught was all about how we can grow in our faith. And the surprising part is what he said about it. Because his sermon was a list of things to do. And yeah, you may be thinking, great, another list that I have to memorize of things that I have to do to check off the list, to get it done. Oh, yep, check off the list. But this wasn't to make God accept you. So a lot of people thought that you had to check things off a list in order to be right with God, in order for God to accept you. No, guys, Jesus was teaching these things, this list of things to do, because God already accepts us. And so the list of things Jesus talked about weren't about earning a relationship with God. It was about what people do when they have a relationship with God, and about how practicing these things makes your faith more alive and your life more full. So that's why we're going to be talking about it tonight. This list wasn't just good things to believe in, and it was things that we do because we believe. We believe in Jesus. We believe in a relationship with him. And picking up at the end of Jesus' sermon, after he talks about all of these great things that he has to do, he says these things. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. And so notice that Jesus mentions two big ideas here. He says, hearing his words and putting them into practice. They're one and the same. They go together. Because it just isn't enough to say, I have heard every sermon that Jesus preached. I have heard everything from him. There's more to having a real and authentic faith than just us hearing and just us knowing. And as Christians, I feel like we could sometimes feel like we're hearing information and that's enough. And that's the whole point, because we're here to learn more. At church, you go to learn more about God. At church, you go to learn about knowing what you're going to do and how you should act and blah, 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 blah. And we have to learn all these things and memorize all these passages. We think attending church or youth group or a Christian club before or after school or a Christian summer camp is enough. And if we hear the right stuff and we sing along to the songs and we go through the right motions, then we're good. We have that relationship with God. We're a Christian. It's all good. And as awesome and important as showing up is, if you and I don't do the things that Jesus actually talked about, actually preached to that crowd with, the things that reflect an actual change of heart, then our faith can be in danger of being counterfeit. Because it's not just about hearing it, but doing something with what he said. And so think about getting ready to drive. You have a lot of things that you could do. You can go to a driver's ed class and learn about driving. You can watch YouTube videos about driving and how to drive properly. You could take a bunch of tests about driving and ace all the tests. And you can listen to your mom lecture about driving, and it still isn't the same thing as saying, hey, Dad, I read this textbook about driving. Can I take the car for a weekend trip with my friends now? Because I read all of these things and I know everything now about driving, you know? And I hope you guys know that that wouldn't work. So don't try doing that with your parents or your guardians, because your dad would probably say, I'm really glad that you read that book, but show me. Let's go, and you're going to drive me around, and let me see how your skills have improved and how your driving skills have developed. And then maybe you could go to, I don't know, the gas station and learn how to pump your own gas and then come back. And then maybe we'll talk about you going on a weekend trip with your friends in a couple of years, you know? Similarly, Jesus is saying that there's more to our relationship with him than just hearing his words. Because, in fact, lots of people who were physically present on earth with Jesus back in the day, heard his words but didn't follow him or develop an authentic faith. Hearing and following are two totally different things, because remember, Jesus said, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on a rock. And then he adds this. He says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. And yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on that rock. And so here Jesus points out the reason the house made it through all of these hardships, the storms, the floods, the winds. And it wasn't just because somebody knew about the right way to do it. Friends, it was because the wise man actually did something with what he knew. He knew how to build a strong house, and then he actually put that into action and built it. Because then Jesus talks about the flip side of the idea. He says this. He says, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. Which means, like me, when I was in high school, you can have 100% church attendance, know all the right Bible verses, and still create foolish mistakes and foolish disasters because you didn't do anything with it. And friends, let me tell you, I've made a lot of foolish mistakes in my time, and I'm probably going to make a lot of foolish mistakes again. Because if you don't apply what you learned, it doesn't really matter. When it comes to faith, application is everything. And that's exactly how Jesus continues, because he says, the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. And you know, one of the things I love about Jesus is that he often told stories or created illustrations like this one here so that we could have a picture in our minds of what he meant. Like, can you everybody close your eyes? And picture a house that's built on sand. Picture what sand's like. You pick it up at the beach and it falls straight through your hands. And then try imagining to building a house on that. It wouldn't be very stable because it would be shifting and moving when the winds, it would sweep up out from the sand when floods come. And then imagine that house on a rock, on a solid foundation. And imagine the winds coming and the storms coming and the waters coming, and it's staying firm. In this case, Jesus used this illustration of two people who built two different houses. One survived the storm and one didn't. One stood strong and one fell apart. What was the difference between those two? Friends, it wasn't hearing Jesus' words, because both builders were listening. Both types of people, the authentic people that went on to have a deep, authentic faith with the Lord, and people that went on to not, to be counterfeits, or to even not have a relationship at all. Both of them heard Jesus. But the difference was doing. Because real faith is about doing and not just knowing. And I'm not saying that listening to Jesus isn't important, because it is. And so is showing up at church, and so is reading the Bible and listening to messages like these. After all, you can't do what you don't know to do, you know? As we said over and over again, though, knowing isn't everything. Knowing isn't enough. You see, when you know who Jesus is, it changes everything. Because it's about how what you know changes what you do. And so when you know, it changes what you're going to do after you know that thing. And so it changes how you treat your friends when you know Jesus. It changes how you treat your family, how you live your life. But none of that happens if you listen and you don't do anything with what you hear. Now listen, if I'm being honest, one of my biggest temptations is to make following Jesus about learning and going deeper just by studying and reading and thinking, because for a long time, that's what I thought a relationship with God was. I thought I had to know and learn and keep on doing one thing after the other because I thought that's what I had to do to earn God's relationship. The cool part is that we have already earned that relationship with him. He already loves us enough to want that relationship. And number two, knowing everything doesn't do anything if I don't put that into action. And so over time, I learned that I could listen to sermons, I could do devotionals, I could show up for small group, and all of those things are good. But for me to grow my faith, for it to be personal and not just going through the motions, the stuff that I should learn, keep my heart to change. I should learn to change my heart and do these things like honoring parents and step-parents, like forgiving siblings, loving neighbors, praying for enemies, forgiving to people in need, serving people who can't repay me, speaking up for people who are being hurt or can't speak up themselves, making wise decisions. And I'm not saying I did these things without ever messing up or falling short. And I still mess up and I still fall short. And in fact, this list is just an example of some of the things you've probably heard if you've been around here for a while. The point isn't that we just become perfect Christian performers, guys. The point is the people who develop a real, authentic faith of their own are people who learn to hear and apply what they hear. They move, they try, they give it a shot, and then when they fail, they try again. And over time, practicing these actions becomes one of the things that moves their faith from counterfeit to real. Not because they're trying to check things off the list, but because they crave a relationship with God and they want to be able to do things with what they know, with what they've learned here. And this is, by the way, why we have small groups. Because your real life is complicated. Life is complicated. Relationships is complicated. And because we can talk about what Jesus said on that mountain, but figuring out what to do with that information in your home, figuring out what to do with it in your dating life, with your friends, at work, it gets a little bit more specific and a little bit more crazy and a little bit more complicated. And talking with your friends or with your leader about how to make true personal faith and true authentic faith can be really helpful to have a community to be able to do that with. And so as you head out today, I want you to know that God wants to have a personal, very real faith of your own. He wants you to have that. And God wants a real relationship with you based on real experiences with you. But this kind of real personal faith takes more than just knowing information. It takes doing something with what you know in your own life. And a perfect way to do that is to take one thing that you know. So one thing that you might learn here tonight or learn in your small groups or that you've heard over time or maybe one thing that you've read in the Bible and just start there with putting that one thing into action. And so maybe that is treating others the way that you want to be treated. Maybe that is starting to talk to God every day and to start having that relationship with him. Maybe that is starting by trying to forgive somebody that you haven't been able to forgive, or praying for an enemy, praying for somebody that you really dislike. And that's how we could start over time learning how to have that authentic faith, learning how to do stuff that we learn with it. And over time, it starts to get easier and easier. But the great news is, friends, is that we have each other to do that with together. We don't have to do that by ourselves. Will you pray with me? Lord, I know that in the past I have made a lot of mistakes with just going through the motions, with thinking that I have to know everything in order to be able to have a relationship with you. Lord, I know that there might be students in this room that might have at one point felt that way or might feel that way right now. And maybe we're all at different stages in our faith. Maybe some people have a great relationship with you and some people are still trying to figure it out. But I ask that you help us learn and you help us put what we learn into action, that you help us do the things that you teach us. You help us do the things that Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount. I ask that you be with these students as they journey along in that relationship with you, and that you help them lean on each other when it gets hard and complicated and weird. It's in your name I pray. Amen.